Hello everybody, and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DaCosta, and this is Consistent Preterism. Thank you for joining me today. It's great to have you. Today we're going to take a little break from our 100 Reasons series, and we're going to come right back to it. But I wanted to talk briefly about a new idea that I've been kicking around, and I've been kicking this idea around for quite some time, on and off. But sometimes what I have found is that when you hear something from another person and you consider it, even though you may have considered it before, the way that they word it just makes better sense. And it just kind of clicks, right? Excuse me. And so the way that I test, and I've mentioned this many times before, the way that I test a theory when it comes to biblical ideas and whatnot, is I see how it fits with the other pieces of the puzzle, okay? In other words, when an idea is presented, or a theory as to what this could mean or how this could fit in, I typically do a quick brain scan of everything that I know that's said in the Bible, and that's obviously a lot of stuff, and I say, will that work, right? Because to the person who's presenting the theory, to them it might seem like, wow, this really fits. But to someone who may know a little bit more about what's actually in the Bible, Old and New Testaments, they may have 100 objections right off the bat and say in their head, well, that's not a bad thought. However, it would clash with this, and this. Right, so if there's big problems, typically I, dismiss things immediately. If there's some problems, mediocre level problems, I'll consider it. And if there's little to no problems, I will surely consider it. So that's kind of how I rule things out quickly. But a guy emailed me. His name was Hank. I can't remember his last name, but he emailed me. It might have been like Sniffle. I think it was Sniffle or Siffle. I don't know. Anyways, emailed me saying he's a newbie to IO and he loves it and he's addicted to it. But he also suggested that the great multitude of Revelation 7 from every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred is actually Ephraim. It's actually the tribe, the descendants of Ephraim. Okay, and you might be saying, well, isn't that what you've taught? It is, but it isn't. When I typically read or have read Revelation chapter 7 and have taught about it in the past, I have said, and trust me, I'm not sold on this yet. I'm still weighing out the possibilities of it. It seems like a very plausible, a very good possibility, but I'm not 100% convinced because, again, it comes back to, well, how many things does that clash with? And I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm just saying things would need to be ironed out further in order for it to be right. And so, anyways, my typical stance on Revelation 7 is that the 12 tribes are listed. He hears the number. There are 12,000 from each tribe, a total of 144,000 from the 12 tribes of Israel. Then I say, immediately he now looks and sees this great multitude from all nations. Excuse me. So my thinking in this is that these are the same groups. The beginning of it is the hearing of the number. It's a rough number. It's a symbolic number. It's not meant to be taken literal, 144,000, but it completes the 12 tribes of Israel. And then I say that John now looks and sees them, and he sees that they've come from every nation, tongue, and kindred. Sorry if I just broke up there. Not sure if I will or not, but that's my theory on Revelation 7, and it has been for a long time. I take the great multitude as inclusive of all 12 tribes, no matter where they were, near, far, Jew, Gentile. That's the totality of them. And at the end, it says that they came out from the great tribulation, which, if you know what the last days of the New Testament was, it was the Great Tribulation. So to me, it seemed to work very nicely, and it still does, that this great multitude from every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred represents the totality of Israel. All 12 tribes, okay? And this gentleman had suggested a slightly different way of understanding it. In light of my number 5 in my 100 Reasons series, which he listened to, the one where I talked about the promise made to Joseph by Jacob, that his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, that Ephraim would become a fullness or a multitude of nations, right? He would be the greater of the 2 and would become a fullness of nations, a multitude of nations. So here we have this great multitude in Revelation 7 from every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred. Now, it's interesting, I gotta say, because when you look at Revelation 7, you obviously see the 12 tribes, all right? And you notice that Ephraim is not listed. Now, some people will argue, well, Joseph is listed, so he covers Ephraim. But that doesn't work either, because Manasseh is listed, right? So Manasseh is listed, so is Joseph. Where's Ephraim, right? Doesn't make sense. So then you look and you see this great multitude from all nations, every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred. So this man is suggesting, and I'm considering and testing the theory, what if the great multitude is actually Ephraim, and they are the fullness of the nations that Genesis 48 promised they would become, and that Paul was rallying in order to complete the mission of all Israel saved? It would kind of make sense, wouldn't it? Again, I am not sold on this theory just yet. I'm testing it. There's still a lot of things that would need to fall into place, which have not yet. And so, another thing that does fall into place quite nicely is the 12 apostles to the 12 tribes. Now, remember, you have the 12 apostles. You have one apostle betray, Judas, and one added. So you're still at 12. Well, Paul is considered to be the 13th apostle. And he was the apostle to the nations. He was called by, supposedly, Jesus to go out and be the apostle to the nations. Now, if the fullness of the nations is Ephraim's descendants, and if that great multitude from every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred is Ephraim's descendants, that would kind of work, wouldn't it? Because Ephraim would be the 13th tribe, and Paul would be the 13th apostle. Kind of interesting, right? You got 12 apostles for the 12 tribes, which is listed in the beginning of Revelation 7. And then you have perhaps Paul being the apostle to the nations, being the one in Revelation 7, that great multitude from every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred, which is, of course, Ephraim's descendants being promised to become that. So the 13 and the 13 kind of lined up. And then I took that a little further and was thinking about, where is Dan, right? The tribe Dan, in that final listing of all the ones who received and inherited the promise. Dan is gone. Well, that kind of lines up with Judas, right? Judas is gone. Judas had betrayed him. And if you know a little bit about Dan, Dan was the first of the tribes to really commit adultery and violate the idolatry commandments and everything. Again, kind of betraying God and the covenant. And so my thing is that could Dan be representative, or could Judas be representative of Dan, and Dan be no longer receiving of the promise? Some people suggest that Joseph, listed there, is in place of Dan. So there's a ton of different theories. And there's also a ton of different ways that the Bible lists the 12 tribes. As you know, or as you might know, you should know, no two ways are the same, right? Sometimes they exclude this one, sometimes they add this one, sometimes Levi's not there because they're, the priests that was separated. There's a lot of different things going on there, but I'm looking specifically at that final listing there in Revelation 7 at the very end of the story as they're about to inherit this promise. Who's there? And that's the list, right? It's the 12, and then you have this great multitude from all nations, which, again, Ephraim's descendants were promised to become a multitude of nations. 13th apostle, 13th tribe, Judas betraying, Dan betraying. There is some similarities and some parallels there that should be a little eye-opening. There's a lot more that can be said, especially when it came to, the birthright and how that whole process worked. Part of the birthright was that, well, there's a lot here that could be said, but you would receive a double portion of the land, or a double inheritance. I think that, I'm not exactly sure. There were three things I think that you would receive, and I know one of them was a double portion of the land. And so it's kind of interesting how Joseph, after the 12 tribes, or after he sort of saves Jacob during that time and takes them to Egypt, where he was, thriving, Jacob's now blessing Joseph, and because of that, it seems like he blesses him greatly, right? Because Joseph kind of hooked him up, and his other sons, he took Joseph and he put his hands on his son's head and blessed them. And it actually says that he would, Genesis 48 says that Jacob was giving Joseph double of what he gave his brothers. Something along those lines. Go read it. But he was giving him double of what he gave his brothers. So Joseph essentially got a double portion with Manasseh and Ephraim. And we also know from places like Judges and even Genesis, maybe even Deuteronomy. I think it's Deuteronomy. The tribe of Manasseh was called a half tribe. Right? It was a half tribe because Ephraim was the other half. Right? So there's so many different ways that this can be looked at based on the differing ways that the Old and New Testaments refer to the tribes. But I think that there's something there for sure that could be considered. Now, I'm not fully on board with it because I see that it clashes with a lot of places too, like Revelation 14. And no one but the 12 tribes could learn the redemption song because these were the ones redeemed from the earth. Well, what do we do with that, right? If the great multitude is different than the 12 tribes listed in Revelation 7, in other words, if you have the 12 tribes listed first, plus Ephraim as the great multitude from all nations, then what do you do with places like Revelation 14, who show that no one but the 12 tribes could learn the redemption song? Do you take Ephraim and throw him back into the 12 tribes there? Maybe. I don't know. Perhaps Revelation 7 is speaking of the 12 tribes as a whole, but lists Ephraim as a little bit different than them. And even though he's sort of this 13th entity, maybe he should be considered part of the 12 tribes. Because when you think about it, when you list the 12 tribes, Joseph technically could count for his two children, Ephraim and Manasseh. Right? That's how some people interpret it anyway. So could Ephraim and Manasseh still be part of the 12 tribes as they sort of fall under Joseph? I don't know. There's a lot. What I've learned is that the Bible is full of code. It's full of allegory. It's full of hidden meaning. It's a huge puzzle. And it falls together pretty nicely when things are correct. When things aren't correct, you run into a lot of problems like futurism, inconsistent preterism. You run into problems, right, that you can't get out of. This is a theory that I'm considering, and I'm kicking it around because I like how it lines up, A, with the great multitude fulfilling the promise to Ephraim's descendants, right, that they would become a multitude of nations, a fullness of nations. And then you have Paul saying, when the fullness of those nations come in, all Israel will be saved. But specifically speaking on Revelation 7, that great multitude from all nations, is that Ephraim exclusively? Or is that a full look at all of them having come back and standing in heaven at the end? You know, I think still I probably swing more towards that way. Because remember, it seems as though the picture in Revelation 7 of the great multitude from all nations is actually one of them in heaven, right? So this whole thing is completed, right? Now, if this was supposedly the tribes of, if this was supposedly a picture of Ephraim, what is Ephraim doing in heaven singing without the other 12 tribes, right? There's that problem that has to be dealt with. So there's a lot of things that I think need to be dealt with, but I considered this a worthy, plausible theory, one that I wanted to pass out there and see what people thought of, and especially since we know Paul was that 13th apostle, and he was the apostle to the nations. Was Paul's mission to gather in Ephraim specifically? Or are we looking into that a little bit too much? And should we just understand, the great multitude from all nations to be inclusive of the totality of all of them in heaven at the end? What do you think? I'm going to leave this one out there. I would like to get some feedback from you. If you enjoyed it, give it a like. But don't forget, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. I'd be interested in hearing it. And we'll come back around to that 100 reasons, folks. I hope everybody has a great day. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.